These people who work in the shadows are trying to establish a new world order, just like Hitler envisioned. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One world, one race, and one ruler. A new world order upon the ashes of all people and all sovereignty of all nations for all time. Brian, you were a lieutenant commander in the British Navy, is this correct?
That's correct.
You were in charge of a particular vessel?
HMS Orkney, which was an offshore protection vessel. But my main expertise was anti-submarine warfare.
In the past few hours, we have seen the abolition of the British Isles as a sovereign nation. How does this hit you, and is it not, in fact, the successful end to nation status, as would have happened had it been under Adolf Hitler?
You've given me several questions there. Firstly, I'm not shocked, because I'm one of a number of people, including yourself, who's been watching this come for a number of years. We've seen the beast break surface, so this is something that many people knew was coming, but a relatively few compared to the population as a whole. But we knew this was coming, and now it's broken surface and we can see it.
Well, are the British people so damned dumb? Are they so zombieized that they could not see this happening, and once having seen it happen, and it's in the front page of the newspapers, why haven't they reacted to the surrender of their nation to a Hitlerian super-state through the European Union, which is exactly what Adolf Hitler envisioned in his book, The World Order?
Well, people haven't seen this because they have been deliberately dumbed down by an ongoing propaganda campaign, and I believe that that propaganda, that socio-political attack on people, has been occurring since the end of the Second World War. I can probably sum it up quite nicely with my father, who's 90 years old, and he said to me a little while ago, did I think that people in this country had changed? Because he said they've lost their humour, they've lost their willingness to stand up for their rights. They don't seem bothered about what's happening around them. And he said, did I think they changed? And my answer to him was no, they haven't changed, they have been changed. They have been deliberately changed by a socio-political economic attack. And that attack has been waged on the people of this country since the end of the Second World War, and it has been designed to dumb them down. The overall programme is very clearly illustrated in a matrix at the front of a book by Christopher Story called the EU Collective, Enemy of Its Member States.
Now, as I have gone around and talked to people in this island nation state, I see a lack of understanding of what freedom really is. They seem to have accepted what in the United States would be unacceptable. They seem to tolerate those things which would be intolerable.
I know that the Brits have been conditioned, but it's almost to the point of zombieization. Why?
Well, I'm just going to stick with the same argument that you are looking at generations now of British who have been subject to this propaganda machine, which has gradually narrowed their understanding of what freedom is into a limited window as defined by pure propaganda coming through the BBC or the so-called corporate TV channels and newspapers. But they haven't been reading the truth. They've been reading an increasingly narrowed explanation as to what freedom is.
In Britain, I see a lack of understanding of what freedom is. George Orwell talked about lies being the truth, truth being lies. A complete, total distortion. And Orwell wrote his book within the confines of the BBC. How does all of this come into being?
We've got to go back in history to start to understand what has actually brought us to the condition where we've got people who are acting as zombies at the moment. What I believe when I look back is that for Britain, the war affected the whole of our society. It wasn't like America, where people in the more in the hinterland of the country weren't affected by the fighting, but for Britain it affected the whole nation. So the moment the Second World War was over, people felt that freedom was the ability to do as they pleased and to enjoy themselves, to be free of the fear of the fighting and dying or being injured was freedom. And therefore they were happy to still accept, many of them, a very austere life, and that was freedom to them. Now in America, many people never had constraints on them through the war, so they continued to understand in America that what real freedom was, the ability to be able to speak your mind, to eat the food and the quality of food that you want, and also to have employment and to have your children educated in a way that you wanted. So all that was possible, particularly in America. In UK, the austerity of the post-war period meant that people were inherently constrained. What happened on top of that was that a propaganda program was implemented to capture people's minds and to tunnel them into a very constrained vision of freedom, whilst their freedoms were stripped away. Now the evidence for this is overwhelming. It is well reported. In America, in 1963, in the Congressional Record, it was recorded by one of the United States senators that the US was starting to come under attack by a Marxist program. And the record, which is there for all Americans to see, clearly set out what was to be done. Children's education was to be dumbed down. Basically, women were to be, if you like, attacked in society in as much as their role was to be brought into conflict with the role of men. And this is where the feminist angle comes from. The church was to be attacked in an extremely big way because Christianity was to be destroyed. Politicians were to be ridiculed and undermined, and the national institutions were to be infiltrated with a view to slowly confusing and collapsing them.
Isn't that exactly what has happened here in the UK?
Absolutely, and this is one of my key points, that if you look for the evidence in history, it is all there, because if we come to the UK, we can see that exactly the same pattern has been used to subvert and then collapse.
Nazization of the nation by the same people who have been voted to prevent the Nazization of the nation and protect the liberty of the people.
You are absolutely correct, but I'm going to say perhaps for viewers you've jumped on one step a little bit too far. I want to bring you back and say that if we look at the nature of the attack on society, it comes straight out of Marxist doctrine. This is absolutely clear, the evidence is overwhelming. And that brings us with a problem, or many people with a question. Well, aren't you talking Nazis, or are you talking communists? What we have to remember is one simple thing, that both the communist doctrine and the Nazi doctrine was founded on the works of Marx. And so if we see in the dictatorship that is establishing itself attributes which are slightly fascist or slightly communist, this makes complete sense because the baseline is Marx.
Well, Adolf Hitler said on February 5th, 1941, he said, basically National Socialism and Marxism are the same. The whole of National Socialism is based on it.
That is correct. So again, we have the raw evidence that the Nazi movement and the communist movement were working very comfortably to a Marxist doctrine. Now, what has happened is that we have been fooled into thinking that at the end of the Second World War the Nazi doctrine disappeared, which it did not. The fighting was over, but the ideology was very much alive and well, and we know that many of the outright Nazis were allowed to move out of Germany. Many of them went to South America, but many went into the United States.
Is that through Operation Paperclip?
Through Operation Paperclip. And we had the same situation happening in Britain, that we had people who cleansed their identities and then came into Britain. We can also see through documents, through original Nazi documents, like the Europese Wertschaft, Gemeinschaft document, which was written in Berlin in 1942, that Europe was to be made a single political state with one currency, one transport system, and where the area was to be divided into regions, not countries, and Britain in particular was to be stripped of industry and reduced to a state or a number of states dependent on agriculture and tourism.
Is that not exactly what we're seeing here now?
It's exactly what we're seeing, and the best we could say, if you're pessimistic, you say this is an amazing coincidence that the European Union is implementing exactly the same policies that were set out in that original German document. So here we can see now that the European Union is dividing Britain up into regions, Scotland and Wales as two individual regions. Even our capital city, London, is designated a region under the European Union.
So would it be correct to say that the EU is Hitler's dream come true?
In my opinion, it is absolutely correct to say that, but I want to add one thing to that, is that it is Hitler's Marxist dream come true, because we can see that the European project itself is but one part in creating a global government. This is a Telegraph article on the Bilderbergers, who never tell us what they're doing, and in this document the Bilderbergers are quoted quite rightly as saying they're a shadow world government. And we can see already very clearly that the Bilderberg group, which again was founded immediately post-war under the chairmanship of a known Nazi, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. We have seen that organisation, the Bilderberg organisation, directing not only policy, major policy in countries, but selecting which politicians will be the one that implements that policy. So the undertone